Moving on now, US President Joe Biden gave a passionate speech on preserving voting rights. This comes after Texas Democrats took action to prevent a nationwide Republican push to tighten ballot restrictions. Without naming names, Biden targeted his predecessor Donald Trump for falsely accusing Democrats of stealing the 2020 presidential election. Biden said that protecting voting rights from quote-unquote Republican election subversion poses a historic test to the country.
More than 80 judges, including those appointed by my predecessor, heard the arguments. In every case, neither cause nor evidence was found to undermine the national achievement of administering the historic election in the face of such extraordinary challenges. Audits, recounts were conducted in Arizona and Wisconsin. In Georgia, it was recounted 3 times. It's clear. For those who challenge the results and question the integrity of the election, no other election has ever been held under such scrutiny and such high standards. The big lie is just that, a big lie. We'll be asking my Republican friends in Congress and states and cities and counties to stand up for God's sake and help prevent this concerted effort to undermine our election and the sacred right to vote. Have you no shame?
Dozens of Democratic lawmakers have staged a walkout in a bid to derail efforts by their Republican colleagues to pass new voting restrictions. These include outlawing 24-hour polling places, banning ballot drop boxes, and empowering partisan poll watchers. The controversial voting rights legislation faces an uphill battle in the Congress. Biden compared the legislation to pass laws that prevented black people and women from voting in the United States. Republicans are following Donald Trump's footsteps. They argue that tougher voting restrictions are required to crack down on election fraud. Biden drew criticism from progressives as he avoided any mention of the Senate filibuster that stands in the path of the federal legislation. Instead, he said that he would launch a nationwide campaign to arm voters with information on rule change ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. And now Jagriti Dave is joining us live from Washington, D.C. to give us the latest on this story. Jagriti, you've heard the comments of the president on this. Can you give us a lowdown on what is happening right now and what is the general public sentiment on this?
Yeah, I think this is this issue of voting restrictions is causing a lot of concern amongst Democrats, so much so that clearly there was enough pressure from Democrats and activists on the president that he came out and gave this very fiery speech where he said that these Republican-led attempts to change voting rules in several states across the country was an assault. He compared the changes that Republicans want to put in place to Jim Crow-era voter suppression. Right. He has called this the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. So there's clearly a lot of pressure being put on Joe Biden to say something about the sweeping changes that are happening in several states across America, let's say in Georgia, Arizona, and most recently Texas.
Right, Jagriti. Also, like I mentioned earlier, Biden has now said that he would launch a nationwide campaign to arm voters on information about the rule changes. How effective do you think this strategy is going to be, and how do you see this panning out in the future?
Well, it's unclear how effective this is going to be or what that's going to achieve. I think critics of Joe Biden's speech have said that actually what they would have liked to have heard him say was put forward a pathway for how to overcome these Republican objections to the voter legislation that Democrats are trying to pass. This was blocked by Senate Republicans last week. Senate Republicans, like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, calling it a radical proposal designed to rig the rules of American elections permanently in Democrats' favor. Now, this legislation that Democrats want to pass through Congress aims to expand voter rights to make it easier, for example, to vote by mail. But as I say, this was blocked by Republicans, and this is at an impasse now. They needed 60 votes, and it was tied at 50-50. So this is a real problem the Democrats are having to face. And Joe Biden didn't mention anything about how he was going to overcome those objections. Most notably, he didn't mention the filibuster, which is the procedure that Senate Republicans are using to try and block legislation like this. Progressive Democrats are suggesting that the filibuster, this process, needs to be changed to stop Republicans from stalling debate on issues like this, but he has not yet mentioned anything on that front.
Right, Jagriti, thank you so much for joining us with all the updates on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.